Biggie died in 1997. He was only 24 years old, but almost 30 years later, his name is worth more money than ever. In 2025, a deal involving 50% of the Notorious B.I.G's estate valued his life's work at more than $200 million. That number is massive, but there is a catch. Tyanna Wallace did not simply wake up one morning with $200 million sitting in her bank account. The real story is much more complicated, because Biggie left behind something more valuable than cash. He left behind a machine that keeps making money every time somebody streams his music, buys his merchandise, licenses his image, watches his story, or says his name. And now his daughter is one of the people carrying that legacy forward. But how much of that fortune actually belongs to her? How does she make money from her father's legacy? And after nearly 30 years of Biggie's music generating value, what does his daughter's life actually look like? The answer is much different from the usual celebrity inheritance story. And it gets even more complicated after what happened to Biggie's estate in 2025. Christopher Wallace became the Notorious B.I.G in an era when hip-hop was still fighting to become a global business. Then came Ready to Die. Then Life After Death. Then the hits, Juicy, Big Papa, Hypnotize. Mo money, mo problems. And then on March 9th, 1997, everything stopped. Biggie was murdered in Los Angeles at just 24 years old, but his career didn't stop. His catalog kept moving, his albums kept selling, his songs kept streaming. His image kept appearing on clothing, his name kept appearing in films, documentaries, advertisements, collectibles, and licensing deals. And that created something that most artists never get to see. A career that continued producing economic value after the artist was gone. For years, Biggie's mother, Wallace, became one of the central figures protecting and managing that legacy. She helped oversee posthumous projects, licensing opportunities, and the continued commercialization of her son's name. And that decision changed the future of the family. Because instead of letting Biggie become a memory, the estate kept turning the memory into an asset. Then came the number that changed everything. More than $200 million. But this is where the internet gets the story wrong, because the $200 million was not a suitcase of cash. It was a valuation of Biggie's music, publishing, recordings, and certain name, image, and likeness rights. And that distinction is everything, because the real question isn't whether Biggie left his daughter $200 million. The real question is, what exactly did Biggie leave behind? Think about a Biggie song. When you hear it on a streaming service, money can flow through multiple parts of the music business. There are recording rights, there are songwriting and publishing rights, there are licensing opportunities, and there is the commercial value of the artist's identity. His name, his image, his voice, his story, his brand, that entire ecosystem is what makes a legendary catalog valuable. And in March 2025, Primary Wave confirmed that it had acquired a 50% interest in the Notorious B.I.G estate. The financial terms were not publicly disclosed. But reporting based on the deal valued Biggie's life's work at more than $200 million. Suddenly, the number that fans had thrown around for years had something much more concrete behind it. This wasn't just a random celebrity net worth estimate. There was an actual major catalog transaction putting a valuation on Biggie's work. And 50% of an estate valued at more than $200 million is obviously enormous. But again, that does not mean Tyanna personally owns $100 million in cash. Estate ownership is not the same thing as personal net worth. And this is where the story becomes far more interesting. Because Tyanna wasn't simply waiting for somebody to hand her a fortune. She started building something herself. Tyanna Wallace was only a baby when her father was killed. She grew up knowing him through photographs, stories, music, and the people who had known him. But eventually, she decided she didn't want her father's legacy to exist only inside music. She wanted to build something of her own. While attending Penn State, Tyanna launched a clothing brand called Notorious. The concept was simple: take inspiration from Biggie, but build something personal. The business wasn't just another celebrity merchandise line. Tyanna was involved in the design. She learned the business side. And she spoke openly about wanting the money and decisions to stay under her control rather than simply handing the work to other people. That matters, because this is where the story stops being about inheritance and starts becoming about ownership. Tyanna eventually brought Notorious back to Brooklyn and used the brand as another way to keep her father's name alive. She wasn't trying to become Biggie. She was trying to understand what Biggie had built and turn that legacy into something she could build herself. Then she took it even further. And according to Tyanna, the idea came partly from seeing how strongly fans responded to the items connected to her father when she operated her clothing store. Think about what that means. Biggie's legacy wasn't just generating money through songs. It was generating experiences. Clothing, memorabilia, stories, events, licensing, and cultural value. That is how a dead artist can become a business that keeps evolving. But then another death changed the entire structure. In February 2025, Wallace died at 78. For decades, she had been one of the most important people protecting Biggie's legacy. And shortly before her death, she approved the primary wave transaction involving 50% of the estate's rights. That deal changed the economics, but it also created a new chapter around control of Biggie's intellectual property. Because when an estate becomes worth hundreds of millions of dollars, control becomes almost as important as the money itself. Who controls the trust? Who manages the company? Who can approve licensing deals? Who receives distributions? Who decides what happens to Biggie's name decades after his death? Those aren't small questions. They're million-dollar questions. And in 2026, legal reporting showed that disputes over the structure and control of Biggie's estate were still playing out. A recent court victory involving former manager Wayne Barrow further complicated the picture surrounding the trust and intellectual property. So the idea that Tyanna simply inherited $200 million is far too simple. The actual situation is a business structure involving family interests, intellectual property, outside partners, trusts, and legal control. And that makes the story much more fascinating, because the biggest inheritance isn't necessarily a bank account. It is control over an asset that can keep producing value for generations. Here's the part most viral videos will probably miss. People see the number, $200 million, and they immediately imagine mansions, supercars, private jets, designer closets, a life where somebody never has to work again. But Tyanna's public story tells something different. She has spent years turning her father's legacy into businesses and experiences of her own. She launched Notorious, she developed the Biggie experience, she built relationships within the hip-hop community, and she has repeatedly described her mission as keeping her father's legacy available to both longtime fans and a new generation. Forbes reported in 2024 that Tyanna had already spent years developing these projects, and that she viewed preserving her father's legacy as a personal responsibility. And that creates the biggest irony in the entire story. Biggie became richer after he died. His daughter became an entrepreneur because of the legacy he left behind. But the most valuable thing she inherited wasn't simply money, it was relevance. Biggie had barely started his career when he died. 24 years old, 2 classic albums, and a future nobody got to see. Yet nearly 3 decades later, his music is still being streamed. His image is still being sold. His name is still being licensed. His story is still becoming experiences. And companies are still investing millions into the value of his legacy. That is why the $200 million figure matters. Not because Biggie left Tyanna $200 million in cash, but because his work became an enormous asset after his death. And Tyanna didn't just inherit his last name, she inherited a legacy. She turned that legacy into clothing, experiences, and businesses of her own. Biggie died before he could see what his music would become. His daughter got to see it. Now she's helping decide what comes next, because sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't money. It's a name that refuses to die. And Biggie's name? It's still making money. That's the real inheritance. A legacy powerful enough to keep generating value almost 30 years after his death. And if you want more stories about the hidden money behind hip-hop's biggest names, subscribe, because the next fortune might be even crazier.